everyone. Welcome back to the Being More podcast, where we inspire you to be a little bit more of every role within the Salesforce ecosystem and beyond. For today's session, we are exploring what it takes to be more independent consultant, and I'm joined today by Brian. So, Brian, are you able to introduce yourself to our audience, please?
I definitely am. Thank you so much for having me today, Tom. I am really excited to chat with you. A little bit about myself. So we're talking about independent consulting today. I have been an independent consultant since 2012. So I'm coming up on my 14-year anniversary. I have been doing sort of CRM technical work for about 20 years, and I've been independent consulting for 12-ish years and been doing Salesforce for about 12-ish years. And I guess from a kind of a day-to-day perspective, when I'm doing client work, what I do generally is Salesforce architecture work, data integrations and those kind of things, architecting those kind of things.
Let's dive into that a little bit more. If you were to kind of quantify or describe what it means to be an independent consultant, I guess you're probably wearing lots of different hats at the same time, right? You're probably the salesperson, the implementation person, maybe the QA person, depending on, I guess, how big things are.
Yeah, so I will first to kind of like sort of set our playing field here. When I'm talking about independent consulting, I'm talking about like solo single person consulting, or maybe with a small team of 5 people or fewer, somewhere around there. Not a SI at scale, not like sort of an agency model, which is another great model, but not really what we're talking about today. So yeah, you had mentioned kind of wearing multiple hats, and I think the way that I think about it, not in terms of necessarily the time that I spend on it, but I've got like 2 jobs. I run my business. I'm a business owner. I need to get clients and run the thing and all that. And then I need to service my clients.
What type of other people do you interact with in your day-to-day? So obviously you're going to be interacting with clients perhaps, and then maybe some other team members if you kind of have perhaps a little bit of a bigger project team. How does that work?
Sure, yeah. So I think it's going to depending on kind of the type of work you would do, it may be a little bit different, but I'll talk about what me and my team do and sort of the types of projects we do, and I think it'll kind of inform who I'm interacting with on a daily basis. So what my consulting business really specializes in is providing architecture to companies that already have a Salesforce, usually admin team. Okay, so probably not your like 500s, because they've got a team, they've got architects, all this. But our clients are sort of medium-sized organizations that have a technical team, have an IT team, have even a Salesforce admin team, but they don't have an architect, sort of an internal architect. So we kind of provide that. Generally, like I'm doing that architect work, and I'm interacting with their, the admin team to help make sure they're building things the right way, design, or for bigger projects, maybe I'm designing it and they're implementing it. So definitely dealing with that admin team. For other clients where they actually need like implementation work as well, I have an awesome team of folks that do that implementation work as well. So I kind of have like on a daily basis, like I'm working with hands-on Salesforce teams, which is awesome. And at the same time, I'm working with like CIOs, director of business apps, director of enterprise apps to kind of figure out like, okay, what's their roadmap look like? What are they trying to do? Like, what are their strategic priorities? So I kind of have the great opportunity of working like at that level on the strategy stuff, but also being like with the team that's doing hands-on implementation as well.
Okay, awesome. Well, it sounds definitely quite varied.
Yeah, I think Tom, you probably run into this too. Like, I feel like in an architect role, we do a lot of different things. Like, we need to be aware of the big picture, but we also need to be, really understanding of like how things work hands-on. Like, I've got a friend who always, he he sort of complains about like he calls them ivory tower architects, people who only know the strategy, but they don't know the hands-on stuff. And I think a commonality of a lot of good architects are people that can kind of traverse a lot of different things, the strategy and then the detailed implementation, the technical side, the business side, like they can do a lot of different things. So I'm sure you probably similar experience too.
Yeah, I try. And I think I'm curious now what you think about this as a statement. You have to get hands-on to break it to then understand if it's the right thing and also how to fix it, right?
Yeah, I think it's what's the saying about like before you break the rules, you need to
Mm,
know the rules, right? So you
yeah.
need to be like well versed in quote unquote best practices and how things should be done. And then when you're doing these things, when you're doing a project or doing a design, you may decide that maybe a best practice isn't worth the cost, or there's some trade-off you need to do. But
Yep.
like you said, you need to be very deep in sort of the right way to do things before you can make a good conscious decision to
Mm,
decide to do something different from that.
yeah, definitely. I can certainly relate to that. Just today, I'm covering for a fellow architect who's on leave at the moment, and they've decided to build a flow that runs in system mode. And I'm kind of humming and hawing, and I'm like, okay, why have you made that decision?
Yeah,
So yeah.
yeah. Why was that decision made? What was the reason? Was it an informed decision that somebody consciously made for a particular reason? What was that
Mm,
reason? Or was it somebody made it as an uninformed decision? And
yeah, I have a hunch, at least in this case, it's Experience Cloud user visibility related because it's going
mm,
to be running as a community user. So I think it's probably because they can't see the records or the users behind the records. So I think it's that. But
yeah,
I'm going to check in with them when they're back in the office. We'll see. Maybe have a little debate about it as well.
yeah. It's good that you have the ability to like actually talk with the person that
Mm.
because you probably run into situations where something has been implemented a certain way, but the person who did it is no longer there, and
Yeah.
that's a different fact finding detective work.
Again, just curious now, but do you interact with other clients that are working with other partners as well, and sometimes bridge the gap between the two?
Definitely, as an independent consultancy and
Mm.
small, like this is important for sort of every business or every organization, but you got to understand like what you do well and what you
Yeah,
thrive at and what you don't, right? So bigger like transformation projects, like don't do those. We're not at the scale to do those. But sometimes there have been situations where I would get hired to help a organization like hire to do a transformation project or like
mm,
run their RFP or request for proposals process. Like, okay, we're going to figure out what the scope of this should be. And then we're going to figure out like, okay, if it's an RFP, like what are the bids you're going to, which ones are you going to talk to
yeah.
and all that and run that whole process. So yeah, definitely have those situations where we, with an organization that has multiple consulting companies, which is great. Like again, like no organization can do everything.
How do you toe the line of like being neutral? Because you kind of want to keep both parties on side, right? That's probably a skill in itself. And maybe, well, I think the majority of architects will have that kind of communication skill anyway, but perhaps in your own word, how do you just kind of toe that line, really?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you say that. It's like there's neutrality, or fairness might be
Yes.
another one,
Yeah.
but it's like when I'm hired by a client to like hire another SI, like the client is my client, right? So my goal isn't like neutrality per se; it's to serve my client. It's they're trying to achieve a certain outcome, right? And I think this sounds like sort of business analysis 101,
Right.
but it kind of is like what is the outcome you're trying to achieve, and making sure that everybody's aligned around achieving that outcome. The client, the SI, the rest of the organization, just making sure everybody um, is clear on that. And I think that's the foundation. It's like if you can get that and you get a good partner and everybody understands what they're going for, there's going to be maybe areas where I don't know questions come up or misalignments come up, but generally
Mm.
like that's the foundation for a good team that's going to build trust with each other and hopefully have success. You did, and I'm sure I mentioned business analysis. You did a Vanessa Grant session, right?
Yeah, and in fact, Vanessa's one of the few people to have been on twice now. She did another episode recently where she asked me the questions.
Yeah, I saw that because the episode was Be More Tom Bassett, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I saw that Vanessa was on it, so I was like, she must be asking him the questions.
Yeah. I thought crazy idea putting her in charge for 30 minutes and seeing how that went. And it went quite well. But on the note of Vanessa, business analysis is super important. I feel like if you don't get that bit right, then the rest of your project, kind of the writing's on the wall almost. Do you agree?
Totally. I think even, I kind of make some like maybe subtle distinctions between like business analysis and like sort of scoping of, if you're doing a project, like scoping of the project. But it's the same. I sort of think of business analysis as you sort of have a project and how do you gather the requirements for that project or identify the requirements for that project. And sort of scoping a project is like figuring out why you're doing the project, what should be in scope, what should be out of scope. But it's all the same skill set. It's that business analysis skill set. And yeah, it's like, I mean, you probably see it too as a consultant. I mean, sometimes you see sort of the scope or lack thereof of a project, and you realize like this is very low probability of success on this. Whether it's like it's not like well defined, or like the business objectives aren't clear, or it's vague about what's in scope or out of scope, or there's a misalignment between like the complexity of it and the resourcing of it. All these things, you can kind of see them, and it's like, oh, that's, let's try to shape this up so we can be successful.
Well, I think as well, in that position where perhaps you are working on a project with a bit of a vague statement of work or unclear objectives or goals, I think as a consultant or as an architect, as you said, it's your job to kind of inform those goals, those objectives, and kind of make sure that you have like that as a framework around you, so you can easily say, well, actually, this is an MVP. We've aligned for MVP, so we're going to put this one on the backlog type thing, right?
Yeah, enforcing like a particular scope, making sure like for an MVP that expectations are clear. I saw this on one of the social media platforms, LinkedIn probably, about, I think it was like somebody had talked about simple. Oh, we're going to do a simple prototype or a simple MVP. And they were saying, oh, it's not a great term. It's not great to use that term because different people have different expectations. And it reminded me, this was even prior to going independent. I had the company I worked at, they were talking about doing, I think it was a simple MVP, and they kept talking about simple. Simple was where everybody would use that term simple. It was like when they got to the end, they realized like the business users were expecting, when they thought simple, they thought Google, one place to put the data, or they thought Apple, right? Like simple, clean, minimalistic. Like that's what they thought.
Yeah.
And the dev team thought simple in terms of simple to develop. So they basically, it was like this was like a Java Oracle shop. So they sort of didn't have cloud-based stuff. So when the developers thought simple, they were thinking like basically like table views, like the users would basically have these like very simple basic UIs that they'd basically be entering data into like some table views. And it was like, again, 3/4 of the way through, there was this realization of like how misaligned they were on these things.
So now thinking about this as somebody that's listening and perhaps they're feeling a little bit inspired and want to become an independent consultant of their own, what tips of advice would you give to that person if they're looking to start out?
One of the things that I sort of hear people talking about, particularly in like in the independent space, is they talk about their niche, right? Yeah. Or niche, however different people say it differently. But the specialization, right?
Yes.
And I think for technologists, we think about specialization oftentimes in terms of like tools and technology. So my specialization is field service lightning, or my specialization is marketing cloud, or whatever. And those are important components to it. But I think there's there's other ways to specialize. There's other things, there's other dimensions that you can look at. And I think if you look at the kinds of projects where you've had success in the past, whether at a job or as a consultant or an independent consultant, you kind of look back and you can potentially see some themes, right? And they can provide some like subtleties, areas where you really excel, or things that you do that clients need that aren't really based on technology per se. I'll give an example. If you work at big government organizations that have a lot of process and a lot of bureaucracy, there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff that you need to do in terms of meetings, in terms of documentation, in terms of certain hoops that you need to jump through that are going to be part of your skill set, that are going to be really valuable. And if you work for, let's say, startups, scrappy startups, not a lot of process, you could be doing on paper the same project, right? Oh, we're doing Sales Cloud or whatever. But if you do it at a government organization versus a startup, they're going to be very different projects. And if you kind of look through those types of projects and what you enjoy and what you don't, you can probably draw out a lot of things that are potentially part of your specialization that have nothing to do with Sales Cloud or Marketing Cloud or whatever. Like you may be somebody who's you're great at doing documentation, or you're great at working with stakeholders of organizations that have a lot of red tape and need a lot of communication and need a lot of hand-holding or different things. And it's like when you kind of look back at your projects that you've done, you can kind of pull those things out, and there can be really powerful dimensions you can use to kind of specialize and and have success with clients.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I can relate to that because as somebody that perhaps resisted specialization for too long and is now kind of embracing it by going into the nonprofit world, like what I've discovered is there's lots of different parts of the nonprofit world. Like I wouldn't consider myself a specialist in fundraising, for example. That's almost a whole different game to why a different tool might work better for a different client in the same space. It kind of depends on maybe they've got, I don't know, Dell Boomi already, so let's use that to integrate. Let's not introduce something else. So
and there's like you said, so there's like the technology aspects, there's the industry aspects, and this is sort of part of industry, but it's like all those sort of subtle things like the various cultures, like sales teams may have a certain way that they work, or fundraising teams have a certain way that they work.
Okay, so now give you an opportunity to reflect on your own journey and think about if you were to go on this journey again, what would you change or do differently?
It's not the easiest way to work, kind of getting the clients and working with the clients. You kind of have to, like you said at the beginning, you kind of have to wear a few different hats. And that's not everybody's cup of tea. I enjoy the stuff that I need to do and the stuff that I do on a daily basis. Not every day, obviously, like any job. To answer your question, what would I have done differently? I don't know, probably chilled out a little bit more. Maybe I'd do that. Maybe I'd be more chill.
I think that's awesome. Maybe that's another episode.
Be more chill.
Maybe kind of bonus question there, but the power of your network, do you think that's important? Having a strong network?
I think one of the things that's important to running an independent consultancy, or at least the way that I do, is to have a network of people that you trust and who trust you and that you like interacting with and you like working with, and that's like my favorite thing about this, about Salesforce, the Salesforce ecosystem, and about this kind of work is just the awesome people that I either work with or I'm in touch with or in my network. I don't like the term networking, but I enjoy keeping in touch with people, and I've always enjoyed it and done it, but I probably could have done it within the Salesforce ecosystem more and earlier. So yes, I wish I had done that.
And I think you're kind of practicing as you preach there by helping to run the Boston Architect community group, right? Because they're so important for interacting with each other's and networking, right?
Yes, and that's a perfect example. So we have Boston Architect Group. There's 4 of us that co-lead it. So it's Melissa Shepard, Zach Banks, Brock, and myself, 4 of us. And it's like, it's great having a great group of co-leaders doing it together, you know?
Yeah, because what I kind of learned from helping to run the London one is we all have completely different experiences, right? And we can lean into that. And sometimes in talking to the CTAs and they're being a bit technical, be like, no, you need to rein it in a little bit. I don't quite understand where you're going with this.
Yeah.
But I think that's great because the group and the community benefit from that as well, right?
Totally. As you know, you can't know everything. So I love being able. So Jonathan Fox posted on Twitter or LinkedIn, I think it was Twitter, that he got a session accepted for Dreamforce talking about the PubSub API. And I was like, that's awesome. I submitted a session for Dreamforce on the PubSub API that got rejected. And he's like, oh, and I was like, come talk to our group and do your talk. And it was funny, like he had a recording of a previous version of that talk. It was awesome. So it's like, it's great to be able to have, you know, awesome people with expertise like Jonathan come and speak. So it's great.
Yeah, he must love the PubSub API because when I first spoke at Dreamforce 2022, we were both on stage at the same time against each other. He was talking PubSub and I was talking Salesforce Designer. And now it's this full circle. He's come back and it sounds like he's going to talk PubSub again.
He's doing it. Yeah, he's doing it for Dreamforce and he's doing it for the Boston Architect Group, which everyone should sign up for, July 30th.
Awesome. No, he's great. And he definitely likes to talk about that. So I'm sure there'll be lots of tidbits there.
Yeah,
so,
I'm super excited.
Thinking about this now, if you were to kind of list off some skills attributes it takes to be more independent consultant, maybe curiosity is one of them, business analysis is another one. Are there any other things that you would kind of throw into the mix, do you think?
I would say, I think this is like many things in life. It's like, if you want to do it and you stick with it, I think you're probably you can make it happen. You know what I mean? Like if you prioritize the things that you would need to do to make this happen, I think you can make it happen. I think it's one of those things where like if you want to and you sort of prioritize the things that you would need to do in terms of, you know, networking and building relationships and getting clients and things, I think you can do it. It's just a matter of prioritizing those things. Meaning there's no sort of like magical skill set or anything. Just, you know what I mean? Like with anything, it's like if you prioritize and focus, make it happen. Business analysis would be important. I would say patience is probably a big one in that this is something, if you want to do it, you can, but it's probably going to take longer, probably take a little bit longer than you expect. And you might, as with many things, there might be seasons, right? When you start out, rather than, you know, a lot of people who are sort of successful long-term at independent consulting, they might start off with something that is like a 40-hour-a-week contract through a recruiter. And that feels sort of like a lot of people don't like to do that, which I totally get. But that might be a great place to start. You get some experience, you get some money coming in, you got 40 hours a week, which is great. It might not be the thing that somebody wants to do like long-term, but it could be a great place to start. So patience, kind of long-term view, long-term planning, persistence is all important stuff.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Now you have an opportunity to demyth or clarify something for us. Maybe somebody think of an independent consultant and they come to this kind of common myth or misconception about what an independent consultant is. Is there anything like that kind of comes to mind that you'd like to just clarify for our audience?
I draw kind of a bright line between an independent consultant and, you know, an SI at scale.
Yeah.
You know, like if you're an independent consultant, you're working with the clients, you're a consultant. You're running an SI of, I don't know, a couple dozen people or bigger. You should be a CEO. Your job isn't to work with clients anymore. It's to run a business. Yeah. And so I think that's an important distinction to make. Like a lot of times, even when they're going to be like their ultimate goal as a scale SI, they start off as a, one person shop, which is totally fine, but you're eventually going to need to make a decision of doing one path or the other. One's not better than the other, but people run into problems when they try to do both.
Yeah, totally.
That's a tough place to be. So that I think is probably misconception.
So we are bringing the episode for today to a close, but before we do go, what's the way for people to connect with you? And are there any particular pieces of content or anything else that you'd like to kind of shout out?
Yeah, so I am on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter at this Brian Shea. It's not this is Brian Shea. It's not that Brian Shea.
It's
this Brian Shea. Like in Java where you're doing a variable and it's like this variable. It's this Brian Shea. I do have a newsletter that you can sign up for on our website, sheaconsulting.biz. And that's it. And folks should definitely reach out if they want to get in touch.
Yeah, and maybe people can see you in person if they're in the area at the Boston Architect Group. And also
Boston Architect Group.
Dreamforce?
Northeast Dreamin'. I'll probably be there. I'm in the Boston area, so Northeast Dreamin', very exciting about that. Excited about that.
Well, thanks for your time, and hopefully we inspire some others to be more independent consultant. So thanks again.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. It was fun.